Maybe the thing that is exhausting you is not that you are doing too much. It is that you have never truly rested. You try to stop. You try to lie still in silence. You try to let your mind do nothing. And in that very moment, something strange happens. The quieter you become, the more uneasy you feel. The more still you are, the more the waves rise inside you. It is as if a dark wind is blowing from deep within your chest, forcing you to stand up, to do something, to run away from the quiet before it has the chance to swallow you. Many people think they are afraid of being tired, but the truth is, they are afraid of silence. Afraid of the moments when there is no one left to talk to, no noise to cling to, no tasks to hide behind. Because in that very stillness, the thing we have avoided for far too long begins to stir, like when the surface of the ocean becomes so calm that the depths finally appear. And not everyone is ready to look into that dark part of themselves. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." He did not write that to frighten us. He wrote it to remind us of this. It is only when we rest, when we release our grip on everything happening outside, that the voice of the unconscious becomes the clearest. It does not scream. It does not pound on the door. It only whispers, like a cold breeze slipping through a crack, carrying questions we do not want to answer. We are not exhausted because of our work. We are exhausted because we use so much energy to push down what is rising from within. Have you ever experienced that moment? On a normal evening, you lie down to rest, but your heart begins to race. The more you try to relax, the more your body tightens. Your mind runs wild like fire meeting the wind. Not because there is danger outside, but because the darkness inside suddenly feels too close. That is not something abnormal. It is a sign that the deepest part of you wants to be seen. And that is why deep rest, true rest, can sometimes feel dangerous. It does not make you weaker. It simply pulls the curtain down so you can face the fragments you once abandoned. But from that very moment of facing them, a new journey of healing can begin. Just as a seed can only break open in the moist darkness of the soil, a person can only be reborn when they dare to step into the quiet space within themselves. In this video, we will walk through the 7 layers of deep rest from Jung's perspective, 7 doors that lead you from uneasiness to peace, from fear to clarity, and from chaos to a kind of stillness you may have never experienced. And perhaps the question you need to ask yourself right now is this: are you truly afraid of resting? Or are you afraid of what will rise to the surface once you finally begin to rest? Part 1. When you rest, the darkness begins to speak. There is a very strange paradox. The more you try to rest, the more uneasy you feel. It is as if the moment you lie still for just a few minutes, a layer of darkness begins to move inside your chest. People often think darkness appears when life becomes too chaotic. But on the inner journey, darkness appears most often in moments of stillness, when you stop doing, stop running, stop trying to be strong, when the noise of the outside world fades away, when you lie down and only your own breath remains. It is in that very moment that the shadow, the buried part of the soul, begins to rise. Many people have experienced this without realizing it. A person lies still in bed, turns off all the lights, turns off the phone, turns off everything. They should feel lighter, but instead a quiet restlessness appears, one that is hard to name, not a clear anxiety, not a specific fear, just discomfort, as if in the darkness of the room, something else is waking up. Jung once said that darkness does not disappear when we open our eyes. It simply waits until we are brave enough to look at it. The shadow is not dangerous in a frightening way. It is simply the parts of you that were left behind, the emotions you did not want to admit, the wounds you never had time to touch. And like the surface of a lake, when the wind stops, the water becomes still, the bottom appears, and the things you believed were buried begin to show themselves. You may think you are resting, but inside, a silent meeting is taking place. The shadow wakes up not to disturb you. It returns because it knows you have finally slowed down enough to hear its voice. If you pay close attention, That restlessness is not an enemy. It is a signal, a gentle knock from the deepest part of the soul, where forgotten fragments are hoping to be seen. Deep rest, true. Deep rest is not dangerous in the sense of causing harm. It is dangerous to the old self, to the habits that avoid emotion, to the masks that have shielded you from the world for so long. But to the soul, it is a moment of liberation, a moment when what was hidden can step into the soft light. Remember this, you are not trembling because of the darkness. You are trembling because the light is about to touch that darkness. And what you are about to see, what is rising from the still surface of the lake, may change the entire path of your inner growth. The question is, are you brave enough to stay with that stillness a little longer? Part 2. When there is no one left to blame, there is a moment many people are afraid to face. The moment when we stop being busy and suddenly realize we no longer have anyone to blame. No more conflict. No more person to irritate us. No more stories to reflect ourselves onto. There is only us. When life is still filled with noise, it is easy to believe that our frustration comes from other people, from a difficult co-worker, from an unloving partner, from a family that expects too much, from a society that feels too harsh. But when we stop, when deep rest pulls us into stillness, every external figure suddenly fades away like shadows dissolving in the fog. Only one thing remains, the emptiness opening its eyes and looking directly at us. Imagine someone who always hides inside work. They stay active non-stop, always doing more, always keeping themselves busy. Because the moment they slow down even a little, loneliness rises like water flooding the room. One day, that person decides to rest. No tasks, no schedule, no one around. And immediately, that loneliness becomes a cramped room, locking them in from the inside. There is no one left to blame, no reasons left to explain. They are forced to face the emptiness shaped exactly like themselves. Jung said, all projections must be withdrawn, or the soul will never mature. Every genuine form of inner growth begins the moment the projections fall away. We see clearly, our anger does not come from other people. Our disappointment does not come from the world. Our emptiness is not because someone abandoned us. All of it is made of unhealed pieces trying to find their way home. When rest becomes deep enough, the light no longer shines outward. It shines inward, like a lamp illuminating a room no one has stepped into for a long time. In that light, the truth appears, not loud, not judgmental, but unmistakably direct. The pain we pinned onto others is actually our own pain. The lack we blamed the world for giving us is actually the empty space we never dared to fill with our own presence. And this is the hardest, yet most liberating part of deep rest. There is no more running, no more hiding in another corner, no more staying busy to forget ourselves. The mind becomes like a mirror that has finally been wiped clean, and the first image reflected in it is us. Slow down for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the light shining toward you, not to judge you, but to remind you that you have gone far enough in the outer layers, and it is time to return to the inner ones. And this is when the truth begins to reveal itself. The question is, are you willing to look into that light when it is shining directly at you? Part 3. The soft, deep voice of the soul. There are sounds we can never hear when we are still busy. But the moment the mind becomes quiet enough, they begin to speak. So soft that they feel like a breath touching the surface of the water. That is the calling of the Anima and the Animus, the gentle, deep part of the soul we have ignored for far too long. In daily life, we are used to strong movements, the noise of responsibilities, the pressure of expectations, conversations that are half real and half performance. The mind becomes like a room full of drafts, too many things blowing through, making it impossible to hear a very small but deeply important voice. Jung called it the soul within the soul, the soft feminine presence within men, the steady masculine presence within women, the part that keeps us able to love, to feel, and to stay connected with the life inside ourselves. Then eventually, on a very quiet evening, when you sit down, turn off every sound, and let the room fall completely still, you suddenly realize something that stings. You have forgotten to care for your own emotional needs. You know how to work, you know how to be strong, you know how to carry weight, but you no longer know how to be gentle with yourself. That moment feels like a single drop falling into an old well. The echo travels far, and you realize it is echoing inside the deepest hollow of your own heart. The Anima and the Animus never speak loudly. They only remind you softly, a brief wave of vulnerability, a quiet wish to be held, a sudden intuition that makes you pause in the middle of your thoughts. That is not weakness. That is the soul wanting to be heard. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And it is this whisper that marks the beginning of that awakening. You begin to realize that you have lived too rationally, too busy, too rigid, and too far from your real needs. Like the deep ocean that always remains stable, even when storms rage on the surface, the Anima and the Animus are the deep layer that keeps the soul in balance. When you cannot hear them, you easily choose the wrong path, love the wrong way, and become exhausted without knowing why. But when you pause and allow stillness to open a thin beam of light inward, you can feel that soft calling, not demanding, not rushed, just like a gentle hand placed on your heart saying, "You have been tired. Come home." And in that moment, you touch the truth that you have never lacked love. You have only lacked your own presence. But to hear that voice, to truly understand where it wants to lead you, you must face one of the most challenging layers of the inner journey. The question for you is this: are you quiet enough, slow enough, to hear that whisper? Part 4. The ego begins to shed its mask. There is a truth that few want to touch. Sometimes the emptiest feeling arrives exactly when we think we are fine, exactly when we have just stopped, exactly when we believe we are resting. When deep rest begins to go deep, the ego, the familiar, noisy part that always wants to control, loses its stage. It no longer has a target to aim for. No more lists of things to do. No one left to prove how strong it is. And no more quiet applause inside the head for it to cling to. So, in the very moment we slow down, the ego that has stood at the center for so long suddenly staggers like a flame that has burned too long, fading, burning out, revealing the ashes it once hid. Imagine someone who always appears strong, always leading, always bouncing back quickly, always saying, "I am okay," even when inside they are full of cracks. One day, they decide to rest, to truly rest, not to try, not to do anything. And suddenly, an emptiness opens up. Not the peace they expected, but a sense of hollowness, as if the whole inner system has just lost its orientation. They realize they have clung to the role of the strong one for so long, that when the role falls away, they do not know what remains of them. Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The ego is the false light, the outward strength, confidence, and busyness, used to cover a darkness that has never been looked at directly. When rest goes deep, that false light goes out, and the dark area appears, not to intimidate, but to remind us that beneath that strong exterior is a soul that has longed to be understood. The feeling of emptiness is not a sign of collapse. It is the point where the ego begins to melt. It is when the mask is no longer secure. It is the moment you realize that true strength does not come from controlling everything, but from allowing yourself to be honest. Honest about fragility, honest about limits, honest about the things you have avoided for fear of being judged weak. And within the ashes of the ego that is falling apart, a dangerous yet liberating truth begins to appear. That you are not the role you have clung to, not the label strong, not the burden of maturity, not the image the world has built for you. You are what remains after all the disguises have disappeared. So when you feel empty while you rest, do not panic. Ask yourself one slow question, one question deep enough to touch the truth of this journey. If I no longer have to be strong, who am I? Part 5. Stillness examines the foundations within. There is a question that very few people dare to face, and it only appears in the quietest moments. If I do nothing at all, do I still have value? This is not a question from the mind. It is a question from the soul, and it is the very first test you encounter when you enter deep rest. When you are still running, everything seems fine. Work gives you a sense of usefulness. Achievements give you a sense of progress. Busyness helps you cling to a certain feeling of, I still exist. But when you stop completely, when there is no noise left to anchor your mind, another truth appears, like standing in the middle of a vast forest at night, and the only thing you can hear is the sound of your own heartbeat. In that moment, self-trust, the trust in your inner foundation is exposed. There is no praise. There is no productivity to prove anything. There is no one watching you, so you can feel you are doing well. You must rely on one thing alone, something many people lost a long time ago. Trust in your own presence. For example, there are people who spend their entire lives living in the inertia of effort, trying to be seen, trying not to be left behind, trying to be worthy. One day they stop working for a few days, thinking they will feel lighter, but immediately they fall into a sense of worthlessness. No one needs them. No one asks for them. There is nothing to do. And they begin to doubt, not the world, but themselves. Jung once reminded us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because trusting yourself, even when you are doing nothing, even when you create no visible value, is the hardest lesson the ego must learn. Yet that is exactly the doorway to true maturity. Self-trust is not the belief that you will succeed. It is not the belief that you are always right. It is the belief that even if every outer anchor disappears, you will not fall away from yourself. Like a tree standing in strong winds, not shaken at its roots by the storms outside. When you enter stillness and feel uneasy, worthless, or empty, know that you are stepping into the most important test of the soul, the test everyone must pass. If they want to touch inner freedom, if you can move through it, if you dare to stand in that night forest, with nothing but the sound of your own heartbeat beside you, if you dare to believe that your worth does not depend on any outer movement, then another door will open, the door that leads to a deeper layer of peace. And the question for you now is this: are you willing to stand still and believe that you are enough? Part 6. The summons back to the true self. There are moments that are very quiet, yet strong enough to shake your entire life. Moments when you look back at your old path and realize you no longer want to live the way you once did, not because you failed, but because you have simply outgrown that old life. Deep rest is exactly that threshold, a state Jung described as wintering the winter of the soul, not death, not retreat, but the necessary stillness before a profound form of rebirth. Imagine a tree in winter. On the outside, it is bare, cold, and standing motionless without any sign of life. But inside, sap is gathering drop by drop, quietly, slowly, unseen by anyone, so that when spring arrives, it bursts open in a way nothing can stop. Winter does not kill the tree. Winter teaches it to store life, and deep rest does the same for the human soul. Many people mistake deep rest as something that makes them weaker, but in truth, it is the stage where the soul begins to pull itself back to the center, shedding old identities, discarding worn-out roles, and releasing desires that no longer belong to it. Some people may suddenly whisper to themselves, I do not want to live like this anymore. That is not despair. That is the first summons of individuation, the journey back to the true self. Jung once said, we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises. We meet ourselves through countless masks, through countless roles life has forced us to wear. And only when we enter the stillness of deep rest, when all disguises fall away, do we finally recognize the true skin of the soul. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is the process of removing everything that does not belong to you, so you can return to the most original shape of your soul. Like the ocean when the noisy waves recede, revealing the fine sand underneath. Unpretentious, silent, but completely true. When you realize your old life no longer fits, do not be confused. It is a sign that the winter of the soul has arrived. And in that winter, everything becomes still. Everything turns inward, so that you can hear the very deep call. It is time to live as your true self. If you dare to remain in that stillness, without running, without returning to old paths just because they are familiar, you will feel a subtle movement inside, like a seed cracking open in the dark, unseen, but incredibly powerful. And then, right within that stillness, the presence Jung called the self appears. The question for you is this: are you willing to step into that winter, to meet yourself again? Part 7. The light rising from your center. There are days when you think you are falling into the deepest darkness, yet in that very moment, an unusual calm suddenly appears. No warning, no noise, just a gentle breeze touching a heart that has been tired for too long. This is not luck. This is the moment when the self, the bright center within you, begins to rise. On the journey of deep rest, when the shadow has spoken, when projections have fallen, when the ego has faded, and when you have touched the call of individuation, a new inner space opens up, a space Jung called the inner ordering principle, the force that brings clarity, healing, and direction from within. It does not arrive with an explosion. It does not arrive with blinding enlightenment. It arrives with a stillness so gentle that at first you almost do not notice it. You only notice that your mind is no longer frantic like before. The fearful questions suddenly fall away. Your breathing becomes light, and in the middle of chaos, you feel somehow all right. It is like the sun rising after a long night. It does not ask whether you are ready. It does not compete for your attention. It simply lifts its light, and all darkness pulls back on its own. The peace of the self is the same, quiet, yet absolute, powerful, yet effortless. Jung once wrote, "The self is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere." The self does not exist somewhere outside. It is not something you have to chase. It is the still point at your very center, the place you lost long ago. Think back to a moment in your life when, after many days of exhaustion, fatigue, and chaos, you suddenly felt a thin stream of light pass through your chest. Not strong joy, not excitement, just a deep steadiness, like the ocean after a storm, returning to a flat, quiet surface. That is the sign the self has touched you. The self is the part that never judges you, never blames you, never pushes you to become someone else. It only reminds you that you have always been enough, that you have always had a place to return to, and that every journey of growth is simply the path back to that center. When the self appears, you no longer try to become a perfect version of yourself. You no longer fight to prove your worth. You no longer run from the fear of being left behind. You simply become yourself, and that alone is already light. And this is the true essence of deep rest. Resting deeply is not about hiding from life. It is about meeting the bright center within yourself again. So ask yourself this: when every layer falls away, are you gentle enough to receive yourself? There is a paradox that most people never realize. The moment you truly stop is not the moment you are at your weakest, but the moment you become dangerous. Not the kind of dangerous that makes others fear you. It is the kind of dangerous that makes your old ego tremble. Because when you enter deep rest, you touch a layer of truth that very few people dare to face. A layer with no noise, no roles, and no disguises left to cling to. When you rest deeply enough, every illusion you once had about yourself begins to fall away. The things you once believed you needed suddenly feel unnecessary. The things you once feared losing no longer hold meaning. And the things you once clung to become so small that you wonder why you held on for so long. This is the moment when the old ego begins to die. Not a sudden death, but a soft one, like a layer of skin peeling away from a snake that has outgrown its old shape. You are not losing yourself. You are only shedding the layers that no longer fit you. Jung once reminded us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Awakening always goes through a dark passage, where the old must dissolve, so the new can enter. Deep rest does this quietly. It pulls energy away from the old images you once clung to, the fears that once tore you apart, the stories you repeated to comfort yourself. And then something inside you begins to move, very softly, very deeply, like a seed cracking open in the dark. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolutely powerful, like a green sprout rising after a long night. It does not need spotlights. It does not need applause. It does not need to prove anything to anyone. It only needs one thing: stillness deep enough for it to be born. Deep rest does not slow you down. It makes you refined, clear, bright, and dangerous in a way that your inner darkness can no longer control you. Because in that stillness, you see yourself so clearly that no old voice can ever deceive you again. And perhaps this silence itself is your true strength. Because when you are no longer afraid of being alone, when you no longer run from the truth, when you can stand in the darkness with an open heart, you become a version of yourself that nothing can defeat. So the question for you now is this: do you have the courage to let the old ego die, so the strongest part of you can be born? There are journeys that require no footsteps at all. They only require you to stop, to truly stop, and to let your mind breathe. Because sometimes the thing you have been searching for all along is not in front of you, but is standing very quietly behind the noise you created to hide from yourself. When you truly stop, when the outer lights dim, when the wind stops carrying you away, a very soft space opens inside you, like a lake returning to stillness after a long night. And in that stillness, you can finally hear what you have been missing all this time. A need, a desire, a very small calling, but the truest direction for your soul. So before you leave this video, do a small ritual for yourself. A simple gesture, but one that is enough to mark an inner shift. Comment with one word that describes the inner state you want to step into. Just one word. One word that touches the thing you know you need most right now. Calm, light, soft, still, or any word that rises in your chest like a warm breeze. And then ask yourself one more question. A question that seems simple, yet has the power to change the direction of your life from this day forward. What appears within you when you truly stop? Not when you take a temporary break, not when you fall asleep from exhaustion, but when you stop on purpose, when you allow your mind to sink into its deeper layer. What do you see? A fear? An emptiness? A quiet peace as soft as breath? Or a gentle calling you have ignored for far too long? Whatever it is, give it space. Let it be heard. Because as Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege in a human life is to become yourself. And that journey does not rush, does not demand perfection, does not require you to hurry. It only requires you to be present, day by day, breath by breath, moment by moment. When you dare to look inside, instead of running outward. If you feel this video has touched something inside you, subscribe and stay present. The journey back to the true self, back to the self, back to the bright center within you, is still very long, and I will walk with you.